Hello, everyone. Welcome to
Got
Queer Lens. Queer Lens is a column on the Chinese Independent Film Archive website. So it's dedicated to recording queer history, in particular related to Asian queer history. Today, we're very honored to have Dan Tsang with us. So Dan Tsang is a very important Asian American queer activist, and he has also participated in a lot of civil rights movement. So welcome, Dan. To start with, could you
Thank you.
Yeah. To start with, could you please briefly tell us about who you are and what did you do in relation to Asian queer activism?
I was born in Hong Kong, and I grew up there until I went to college. Ended up in the U.S. I went to the school where Sun Yat-sen also attended, but not at the same time. Diocesan boys' school, so it gave me a good grounding in gay lifestyles, also, and also in social activism in Hong Kong at the time. In the U.S., I ended up at from a college in California to the University of Michigan, which was where my activism kind of began more. Although I had been active in London and in UN when I visited on different semesters abroad or away in 69 and 70. And so there was a time in the Vietnam War. So I went to London, and we were supposed to stay at LSE, London School of Economics, but the school was closed because of opposition to the Vietnam War. And so we met in a hotel, and the MP, who is a Labour MP, he met us at the hotel. He was our teacher. So I was exposed to a lot of politics at the time, of course. And I also did my own research on the future of Hong Kong, which I ended up writing for honors thesis about the future of Hong Kong in 71 at my undergrad college. But as a graduate student, there were very few Asians in Michigan who were Asian American. In Michigan, it seems there were a lot more from quite active recruiting from Asia, but the Midwest is pretty white, I suppose, and at the time. So we decided to do something about it, and I started a magazine called the Midwest Gay Academic Journal, because we were sick of all the gay reports, the East and West Coast. The focus seemed to be everything was happening on the East Coast and West Coast, and we wanted to document what was happening internally in the Midwest. And so the first thing I did, even before my publishing or editing these publications that later became Gay Insurgent, what I did was I actually wrote arguably the first Gay Asian manifesto. It's called Gay Awareness. Mm-hmm. And I published it in a publication called The Bridge, which was from Basement Workshop in Chinatown. It was kind of an activist Asian American magazine that was in those days. There was no internet, so everything was done by mail. The magazine was circulated by mail and distributed locally, probably in New York, and among kind of what do you call civil society. In those days, we didn't use the word, but it's called among civil society advocates and participants. And so this was the article I wrote. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure you can see. It's a gay awareness.
Yeah, I can see it. If we could share the link afterward, that would be
we'll share you the link. Mm-hmm. And it was in which I argued that Asians and I identify more as Asian. So that at the beginning of this, I mentioned a third world thing was called the Third World Solidarity Conference. In 1974, February. This came out in 75 February. But in February 74, there was a Third World People's Solidarity Conference in Ann Arbor, at which Angela Davis and other CPUSA members, she was very active in the CPUSA, Communist Party USA at the time, and they were all very homophobic. And so I wrote about that in the, it's ironic because later she came out as lesbian, but Angela Davis. But at the time, a bunch of us were quite upset. We were in the Gay Liberation Front in Ann Arbor at the time. And so what happened was we were upset that there was this kind of making fun of the forefathers of the country, George Washington and the like, wearing kind of almost faggy shoes, something like that. Somebody was making a joke about that at the conference, some of the leadership from this group. And so we, from this CPUSA group, argue for solidarity between people of color and Asian Americans, and also for Asians activists, especially because this was published in an Asian American magazine in Chinatown in New York, to argue that Asian Americans should speak out and support and not just tolerate. So I made the distinction between toleration and acceptance. And so I argue it's the first gay manifesto from the movement at the time. And so that was circulated all over the place, and lots of activists read it, including people that would end up at this march in 1979 that was in Washington, DC.
So
but
the march
in
is
the end,
this image, isn't it?
yeah, that's I have the original here.
Oh.
And so this showed up in the, this was asked to be included in the core exhibit of the Chinese Museum of Chinese in America in Manhattan. When they refurbished, after they got a lot of money, they added a wing and they put this in the core collection. And so anyway, I tried to document the conference in this. This came out in 80, but in 79, we had this conference in Washington, DC, in conjunction with the People of Color Conference. So at that time, there was a lot of solidarity we had built up, partly because of the AIDS crisis. Black activists were gay activists were very involved, of course, with helping out to help the people who had gotten down with HIV or AIDS. And so they were in a group, many of them were active in a group called National Coalition of Black Gays. And they organized this conference at Black University in DC. And so it was the same weekend as the March on Washington. So there was this national march from all sorts of white groups that were marching. And though we had this Asian contingent of about a dozen or 15 people that marched right behind the gay American Indians. They were the leaders of this part of the march. And we marched right behind them. And we had this We're Asians, Gay and Proud banner that we painted and put. And so among the group were women and men, and also from people, not just from America, but from Canada as well. And so it was a start. It was very much a start. And we had conferences and workshops at the same conference. At the conference, we had workshops at the same time. So any questions?
No. So you were talking about the conference immediately after the march. So what was the conference theme? And do you remember?
It was before the march.
Before.
It was a weekend before the march, I think. I'm pretty sure. The theme was, let's see what the theme was. Actually, I don't remember the exact theme.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Oh, it was at Howard University, and it was ignored by the media mainly. but before we got to the conference, we marched in China. I think before I forget when, it was before or after we marched actually through Chinatown. So it's the first time gay people marched through Chinatown anywhere in the US.
Yeah.
And I think it was mainly to deal with reconcile being both people of color and gay or lesbian at the time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we had solidarity statements from activists in Mexico. And the keynote speaker was Audre Lorde, a Black feminist lesbian. And we also had, among the Asian collective, what we call Asian collective, we had a lesbian who spoke also at the conference, and then another one at the march. So here's a speech by Audre Lorde. So I was trying to use my magazine as a when would the ignorance end? And then we formed a lesbian and gay collective and Asian collective. And Hannah Loy was a Chinese American lesbian who spoke at the conference, and her talk was, "Who is the lesbian? Who's the barbarian? Sorry,
yes.
Who's the barbarian?" I mean, yeah. And then at the march, we had another one, a poet, Mitsui Noshiko, and she had at the March on Washington, living in Asian America. Yeah. So the focus was, we had identified as Asian American, and from the article in my gay awareness article, that manifesto, I realized that it was at that Solidarity Conference in '74 that I started identifying as Asian American. Before, I was mainly identified as a student from Hong Kong. Yeah. So I think my identity, political identities and social identities evolve, and they, when you're a kid, you may not adopt, you may adopt a certain political identity even from your parents or something. But because my parents were anti-gay, so I kind of avoided a lot of association with them, their attitudes. I didn't see anything worth following in terms of their politics. So they were more, my father especially was more fundamentalist as a Chinese Christian and a fundamentalist Christian, and in the Presbyterian Church, although it's a Scottish Presbyterian actually, or English Presbyterian at that time. And it's only recently that I realized the history of my father and what he did, and as I write my own history, I'm going to try to delve into the history of my father and my mother. So there's kind of interesting things eventually I'll write about. Yeah. But at the time I was more on my own. I was left in US, and after the first year of graduate school, I was basically left alone. My parents found out I was gay. Actually, they didn't. Actually, I told them. And it's not the best way to do it. I just wrote them a letter. In those days, we used to use aerograms. Aerograms are pieces of paper that folded, and then you can mail them. They're folded and sealed. The post office sold them. So these pieces of paper that you could fold up, and so you couldn't put anything inside, but it was just a letter where you could write. And so I wrote them a letter saying that I was gay. And I had prepared for it because it was after my first year in college, in graduate school, sorry. And I already had a job, and I could, so basically they cut me off after that, totally cut off. And didn't pay for my graduate school anymore.
Wow.
And so, but it was okay, because after the first year in Michigan, it turns out if you're there 13 months, you become a resident. So I can pay resident tuition. And also I was a TA, so actually TA already waived the out-of-state fees because you are a teaching assistant or teaching fellow, they call it. And so anyway, it worked out in the sense that I think it freed you up, given that my parents no longer seemed to care. I just was able to be more active, I think. I think people that lived at that time in Hong Kong, maybe, or in Taiwan or China, maybe if they lived at home or they were close to home, it may have been harder to be publicly open. But they were miles away, thousands of miles away.
Yes. Yeah.
5,000, how many thousands, I don't know. And so from Ann Arbor. And so I just thought, oh, maybe I could. I basically didn't pay attention to what they thought because there was no connection very much at that time. Yeah. Later we kind of reconnected, but yeah. So
That's
anyway, so that was. So the first march on Washington was very inspiring because there were 15 of us, Asians from all over the U.S. and Canada, and we had it's kind of a different period, maybe, because at that time there were so few Asian gays, and if my piece was really the first manifesto, then it was only very recently that some people actually came out in print to talk about it. And since then, I've realized that there have been other people that have written about it, about being gay or lesbian, Asians. But my main identity was Asian, not as Chinese. Because in America, you're basically treated as an Asian. They don't really care where you're from. I mean, they just look at you as different. And so there was kind of some implicit, in the Asian American movement, definitely, there was some implicit solidarity among Asians. And it may be imposed solidarity, it has to be learned, definitely. I don't think it's anything natural necessarily. It's based on the situation of activism that you were involved in. You kind of, in that sense, it was natural if you were activists. But if you weren't, you probably were not thinking that much about other Asians necessarily.
Yeah, but there were also a lot of solidarity between Asians and Black people and people from indigenous or Aboriginal land and so on.
I think the first time we did Native American stuff was at the march actually in Washington. So within our community, I don't actually indigenous groups. But at the march we met some.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you discovered your gay identity and then you find people, like-minded people. So what motivated you to go engage in activism?
I think the main thing was the Vietnam War. I mean, I didn't think the US should be bombing. And so against the war, college students in US and in England also. And so there were a lot of protests, and I don't think it was related to the victims of war, refugees. But at the time, it was more looking at the aggressors, at the people that were bombing. And so we were wondering how we could stop that, do our part to stop the war. So that naturally went on to lead me to be active also among gay, as a gay issue, on a gay issue, because it, as I said before, you can't, this manifesto that I did in 74, I wrote in 74, but came out in 75, awareness. They came out in a Chinatown magazine called Bridge. I argued that it was important to have solidarity with Blacks and with other people of color, and then also to come out within Asian American community, and the Asian Americans need to not just tolerate gay Asians, but all need to accept them. So that actually was when I first identified as gay Asian, as a gay Asian, or as an Asian American even, in 1974, as a consequence of that Solidarity Conference in Ann Arbor, where many activists were there protesting the state, and including Angela Davis and a bunch of Communist Party USA folks, which she was affiliated with at the time. She was active in, and they had made some homophobic remarks. And so actually it turned out she came out later as a lesbian, so that was kind of ironic. So, but anyway, in that Ann Arbor Conference 74, in February 74, a group of us started thinking that we should do more. And then I wrote this piece that came out in February 75 called Gay Awareness, which called, yeah, so my consciousness was raised at that conference, and then I decided to write kind of a manifesto, I think of it as, to raise the issue of being gay and being a person of color, I suppose. Yeah.
But apart from writing articles, you also edited a journal, and this is a magazine that you edited called Gay Insurgent. Could you tell us about how it started and what did you do?
Yeah, I started as another magazine. A predecessor was called Midwest Gay Academic Journal, and that was because there was already this academic union, gay academic union for academics in the U.S. That had been started, and we were kind of, a bunch of us were kind of upset that the focus in the gay academic union was mostly about East Coast and West Coast activism, academic activism in the schools and in the universities mostly. And so I thought, maybe I could start a magazine. So I called it Midwest Gay Academic Journal. But then I thought later that that was too tame. That wasn't very radical enough. So I called it Gay Insurgent. And it was, I was collecting a lot of underground press at the time. Now it's called alternative press, but in those days it was called underground press. And there was a journal called Insurgent Sociologist for radical sociologists. So I borrowed the part of the title and called this Gay Insurgent. And then I subtitled it a gay left journal. And so it stuck. So I decided to merge my, combine the earlier concern about Midwest being ignored and to come get a more radical perspective.
Yeah. How did you solicit articles for the journal, and where was the journal distributed?
I just, there was no internet, so I had to call people or I had to write people that I knew, activists I knew, and distribution was by subscription, or I would also bring copies to newsstand, and especially a big newsstand in New York City, in kind of the gay area. And there was one big newsstand there, and you can put things on consignment, I guess you call it, on consignment, and they would pay me when they sold. So after 1 or 2 months, I would go back and say, did you sell any? And then they would pay me for the 10 issues that I left or something. Yeah. So it's very slow. And
so were there a lot of gay left journals? So I'm sure there are gay magazines at that time, but this is gay with a clear leftist political stance. It must have been rare, or
yeah, I think it was very I think people probably dismiss it because it wasn't ideological. My leftism was more kind of moderate, I suppose you'd call it. I'm sure there were other left-wing journals in the UK and in US. So they would probably dismiss my magazine as not being anything worthwhile because it wasn't taking any ideological stance as much. We were mostly writing critiques of the state, and that's about it. Yeah.
From the few articles I read, it's very good. It's very political and active and radical. I like it.
You saw some articles.
Yes, and available online.
Oh, they are. Yeah. I know some people have scanned issues and put up online, but I haven't decided what to do with the whole set yet. I might, I mean, I'm still in the process of scanning everything.
Yeah, brilliant. Looking forward to more scanning. And also, you also got involved in a radio program. What's that about?
That was later on in 1990s, after all this stuff. But as a result of the what do you call, the March on Washington, I wrote an article in this book called Asian Americans, the Movement and the Moment.
Wow.
The Movement and the Moment.
I like
from
it.
UCLA Asian American Studies Center. Yeah. And there's some cute pictures of me here.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
This one. Yeah.
You were very young at that time.
With my classmates. I was like 13 or 14. And the camera I was holding, I actually just found the camera again. It was, the camera I'm holding, a Yashica Flex, Japanese camera that I was using as a teenager. I just found a few weeks ago in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And here's a picture of me in my school.
Yeah.
As a schoolboy.
Very neatly dressed.
And then later, yes, and then later in Michigan, there was a teaching fellow strike, and I was the PR person.
Yeah, making
the press
a speech.
Person. Yeah, talking to the press. Yeah. So and here's Angela Davis. I told you Angela Davis was at an earlier conference in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And so.
Thank you.
So this article, I can also give a link. Article actually talks about the progression of the, and then ends with the radio show. But in the meantime, before the radio show, there was also this other conference in Hong Kong in 1998.
Yeah.
Not before, there was after the radio show, but 1998 there was, and I'll talk about the radio show later. 1998 there was this conference in Hong Kong, the Tongzhi Conference. And that was explicitly more Chinese gays. And it was actually the second conference in Hong Kong, but the only one that's been well documented.
The 华人同志, can you raise that a little bit higher? Yes. Yeah, 华人同志的读本. So it's a radar of Chinese LGBT.
Yeah, we didn't use the word LGBT, but Tongzhi. So it's really good because it has lots of contributions from the time at the conference, and there were 17 countries involved. People from 17 countries were involved, including a kind of like a few dozen people from China. And so the conference actually was, because they wanted to welcome people from China, they had it in Mandarin, which was a little bit strange to me because Hong Kong people don't speak Mandarin at the time, definitely. And so, and so that was one of the critiques actually in the latest. So that's included in the text volume. The main critiques were the press conference was very, very tame, I thought. They organized a press conference because they wanted to, but actually the reporters had snuck in and taken pictures during the conference. There was one Chinese guy that actually tried to sleep with me, and he was very closeted. He was from Guangzhou probably, and I think he may have been even married, and he showed up in a photo in the newspaper, although you couldn't tell his face because it's from the back. But here he was trying to be so so discreet, and he's showing up in a Hong Kong newspaper after spending the night with me. And so, so they couldn't really control the press, a lot of press about it. And the press they did try to control. They came out with a press release that said, "Oh, Chinese people are not assertive. We are very polite. We don't want to cause trouble." And so it was all this bullshit. I thought it was too much bullshit. And so trying to act, so maybe I was influenced by ACT UP in the US, I'm not even sure ACT UP was around then, but I think I was probably accused of being an ACT UP type, and I'm not actually a member of ACT UP. So I argued that people should be more aggressive and should, demand things, just like the students, because somebody had said, "Oh, Chinese people don't rebel." That's ridiculous. Look at 1911. Student protests. And so it was all these stereotypes from certain figures who are not even gay. Some of them in Hong Kong who are active, who write about gay stuff. There were some people that were, I won't name names, who were not even gay, and they were at the conference, and they were like pontificating on what gay people should do. They have written many, many books on gays in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and here they were advising people to be quiet. And so I thought that was a bit absurd.
Yeah.
So, but the main criticism, I think, the better criticism, and I was kind of from the far left, but the main good criticism, I think, from Alan Lee, who said basically the meetings didn't go anywhere. There was no action. After the workshops, there were no action.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan Lee was an activist in Canada, Toronto, from Hong Kong originally. And so he argued that you should not waste time. I mean, having all this conference is a lot of energy, and then you end up with nothing, I mean, they did have some resolutions. They were going to set up a network and a foundation or something. I'm not sure the foundation ever got set up, but the network continued.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's true that there was no thought. I think it was too much work. People were so excited to get together that they wanted to talk. It was more socializing. Yeah, and there was a dance at the end, I think I remember. And so that was all. It was all very exciting, but but other people were more practiced in organizing activism. They wanted some practical results. Mm-hmm. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just dissolved in the end. Although the book came out, and that's a big accomplishment, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm glad the book is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it reminds me, especially what happened, and some of my emails are at that time there was beginning to be email. So I wrote emails about the conference and what I thought was left out, and why I thought this kind of safe position was wrong. I argued. And so, and the people that showed up with me were Wan Yan Hai.
Yeah.
He was a doctor, actually, a public health professional in Beijing that had set up a foundation. Mm-hmm. And he actually was living with me in Philadelphia at the time. Where was that? In 1998. I was already in California. Mm-hmm. And I think he lived with me in California for a month. And then we went actually to Hong Kong. Actually, we were on separate planes, I think. Mm-hmm. I remember. And then we ended up at the conference. The other one that I wanted that actually showed up, but he showed up late. So although he was on the conference agenda, he didn't show up. At the time, his panel was Xiaoming Xiong, Xiu Minghong, Sam Sasha, who was a columnist for a Hong Kong magazine, but the author of a couple of manifestos on gay Asians that he had translated into Chinese, mm-hmm. And also from the US, and he and also his book on homosexuality in China, that was in Chinese. Mm-hmm. So Sam Sasha actually lived with me also. That was when I was in Philadelphia, and he lived with me and when he was researching his book actually, mm-hmm. in the US. He was an undergrad in Texas at one point, and then he graduated and was traveling around. Mm-hmm. So both of them are important figures. And I wrote in Gay Asian or Gay Chinese history in America. And eventually I I interviewed Wan Yanhai for a newspaper article in San Jose Mercury News. They gave me a whole spread on a Sunday issue, and I compared him to somebody that now is in the news again, but there's a new book about Hirschfeld, Magnus Hirschfeld, and his Chinese lover from Hong Kong. But in those days, we went critical of him, and because Sam Sasha was the one that introduced him to Hong Kong. He found articles about him speaking at on Radio Hong Kong, broadcasting in 1933 or something about homosexuality in Hong Kong and Asia, in China. And so he gave talks throughout Shanghai and I think Beijing maybe. But in Shanghai, he met his boyfriend, met the Chinese guy from Hong Kong who became his boyfriend, Li Xiutong.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so at the time, we were very interested in the past. And so in my article, I argued that Wan Yanhai was because he was trying to break barriers and bring the message of gay people, and especially working on AIDS at the time. He was the new Hirschfeld, because when Li Xiutong went off with Hirschfeld, one biographer argues that Li Xiutong's father said, "You will be, preaching for bringing the news to the rest of China. The Hirschfeld will be," and so I kind of thought Wan Yanhai would be this similar position, because he was stepping in different. He was in the U.S. Actually, I met him at a pornography conference at Cal State Northridge, and eventually he stayed with me for a while, and then he eventually went back, and then he got imprisoned and he got released, and so there were lots of different things happening. But while during the time he was here, the Chinese gays in Los Angeles started a new group called Nanfeng, Southern Wind, I guess. And they had meetings in a house that many of the Chinese students lived in. And so this kind of gay Asian group started there. And by the time this article came out, it was just beginning to be quite lively and quite an important group that tried to bring news together for the Chinese diaspora in the US.
Yeah. So which city do you remember was a meetup group based?
Was where? Was what? Was what? Sorry.
It was a group. So which city was a group?
Los Angeles.
Yes.
Yeah. Because Los Angeles is actually probably an hour's drive from where I am. Depends on traffic. Could be 2 hours, but depends on traffic.
Yeah.
It depends on how far you go in Los Angeles. Yeah.
But Orange, you live in Orange County, is that correct? Or
yes, it's where Disneyland is. Yes. Yeah, the original Disneyland is there in Orange County, not LA. People don't realize when they visit Orange County, they think they are still in LA, but they're not. Because the advertising in those days probably just never mentioned Orange County.
Yeah. Yeah, you worked at UC Irvine for more than 3 decades as a photographer, librarian, and so on. So what did you do? What kind of activism did you bring to UC Irvine campus?
Well, I think in terms of gay stuff, I remember even before I went to Irvine, I was at the public library in Philadelphia Public Library. The Free Library of Philadelphia. And I remember one time at a meeting of all the librarians from the system, I raised the question why we're not preserving the gay paper from Philadelphia.
Mhm.
There was a gay paper, and in those days, preservation meant microfilming.
Mhm.
And so right after my meeting, they agreed to preserve it. So I just raised the question at a mass meeting, at a plenary of all the librarians. And so that was one way I could do something effective, just bring it to the top just from that one meeting. And then later in '86 I moved to Ann Arbor. I moved to Irvine, and so I stayed there for 30 years. And my activism more was trying to bring more people of color into the library,
Mhm.
and kind of and so it was quite a struggle because I was denied many. I mean, I had to appeal many things that I kind of, we were like faculty because we had the appeals process. It was, even though we didn't have tenure, we did have rights of appeal. And so we could appeal things that were denied me. And like pay raise that wasn't given, and then later was given, and then whatever. And so it was a kind of struggle. And so, but eventually they, uh, I managed to stay there. So I was doing a lot of work. Mostly I was a bibliographer for Asian American studies, politics, and economics. But then eventually some people left, and they couldn't rehire them. And so they couldn't replace them for some reason. And so they asked me if I wanted to be acting bibliographer. And so I was for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, East Asian languages,
Mhm.
and French, Italian, Russian, and business and film studies. So I
Very
was doing like
versatile.
7, and some of them I was doing for 3 years. For East Asian collection, I was head for 3 years, acting. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
So,
crazy. Just because I'm Asian doesn't mean I know anything about the collection.
yeah, I also have to face a problem all the time. But it was still
Yeah.
also during the UC Irvine time that you either started the radio station or you participated in.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, 1993, I started a radio show called Subversity.
Mhm.
And the title is interesting. One of the former graduate students there, he decided to help me coin the term, and it comes from subversive,
Mhm.
diversity,
Yeah.
university, and perversity.
Wow.
So it was a combination. Later on, I found some college had used it in a course
Mhm.
as a project, Subversity. I should have copyrighted it, trademarked it. I mean, I'm joking. But anyway, Subversity was to bring the voices of people that weren't heard, especially activists and filmmakers and authors, and interview. At first, it was a half hour every week, and then became an hour.
Mhm.
So all that, a lot of that, not all of that, many of that is preserved in Apple Podcasts,
Mhm.
and on my website, on the Subversity Show website.
Yeah.
But I haven't added to it in the last few years because I've been in Hong Kong and too busy, and I haven't put up a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of new stuff that could go up.
Yeah.
But I
Listen
could
to one
link to some
episode,
of the
which is really
filmmakers.
interesting.
I interviewed many filmmakers like Arthur Dong, who is very active, in America, documenting Asian Americans. And the most impressive thing I actually was struck by, and I interviewed him for that, was I also wrote for alternative papers in Orange County, like OC Weekly, and gay papers in LA, like Frontiers. But with Arthur Dong, he actually did a movie
Mhm.
about gay bashers, gay murderers. He went
Wow.
and interviewed people that killed, white guys that ended up beating up gays. And so I thought that was amazing because, God, I never thought you could do that.
It is amazing that
It's
he
also
was saying.
scary. It's kind of scary. I mean, I've faced gay bashers myself going to court. There was a group of kids, teenagers, who beat up a Vietnamese older guy, and because he was gay. And when I saw them in outside the courtroom, I was scared because they were huge. One of them was a really huge, like a football player, really big, and I was really kind of scared. And so
Yes.
to have the audacity to film somebody, even though he was in jail, I suppose, in prison, so he probably couldn't do anything in retaliation against Arthur. But so that was pretty amazing. So
Yes.
many filmmakers I've interviewed over the years. More recently was Evans Chen from New York, who has actually been documented Chu Lian, how do you say? Do you know her name?
Say again. Chu.
Her book was anyway. Evans interviewed her, and so she ended up committing suicide. She was Taiwanese lesbian, and
Oh, Qiu Miaoji, I think.
yeah,
Yeah. She was based in Paris at that time.
yeah, and then she died in Paris.
Yes.
So Evans did a whole documentary of kind of a drama series on her, and I interviewed her. It was for Radio Television Hong Kong, originally, and then he's now repurposed it as a for other outlets. Yeah.
I saw
it
that
was a film,
it was
but
really good.
yeah. So anyway, that was my more recent interview with him, and that came out in Hong Kong Review of Books, I think. That interview,
yeah.
So all those are online. I can give you some links.
Yeah, brilliant.
To the filmmakers I interviewed, so you can link it. And I also wrote film reviews also of many queer, especially in queer films, especially in alternative papers. But most of the time it was more interviewing the directors. And I only like to interview unknown people mostly. I mean, Evans is more well known, but most of the time I don't interview somebody who's too famous because it's maybe harder to get hold of them. So, and also if they're really, longtime friends, I don't feel like I can interview them. It's hard, because once you become a friend, it's a different status.
Yes.
You're friends with somebody and you don't want to say, I want to interview you. And they say, what for? So, I mean, you're a different connection, So mostly I interviewed unknowns at the beginning. Most of the people I've interviewed are fairly unknown. And later become maybe Hollywood filmmakers or something, some of them. And I never interviewed them again. And I'm not interested.
But you also write some articles for newspapers and websites, etc. So what have you written on and what are your current projects?
Oh, my current is just mostly on preserving and archiving materials. So that's mostly done workshops, Zoom sessions on that. Yeah. Because, as a society changes in Hong Kong, a lot of stuff is being lost and people are afraid to post things online. And there's a concept I recently been focusing on is migrating archives. So it's not just people that are migrating. You hear about people leaving Hong Kong, but I'm focusing on archives that have left. There's archives that have gone to Amsterdam, for instance. And in the past, Amsterdam got hold of when Vietnamese in Hong Kong were worried about the art collection in the refugee camps. They sent it to the Institute of Historical Studies, Social History, Israel Social History, International Institute of Social History, IISH, in Amsterdam. And the refugee collection of boat people artwork in the detention camps in Hong Kong refugee camps. They were in Amsterdam for about 10 years. and eventually they were transferred back to Hong Kong and now reside at Chinese University. So, so that's one migrated archive that remigrated back.
Yeah.
And so it's not a new concept. Archives have migrated because of political situation, political uncertainty, political change. The biggest, I think, one was maybe with the South African case. People that were in the anti-apartheid movement in Southern Africa, the archives were all over Southern Africa. And it was only after liberation in South Africa that the archives returned to South Africa or went to South Africa.
Yeah.
Of course, some were missing after all these years. So there's always a danger of loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about queer history, are there any queer history archives in either Hong Kong or Asia? And how is queer history preserved?
I know that's what I've been trying to research. I don't have, I was hoping to do a panel on queer Asian archiving, but there is, I think the most prominent one is a Gay Indonesian archive. There's a queer Indonesian archive, and they work with Australian National University, I think. And Australian National University has also put up some Thai gay periodicals.
Yeah, Peter
online.
Jackson primarily.
Yeah, Peter Jackson, yeah. And so those are one of the two cases. In Hong Kong, there was a website, but it's ironically, actually, the government public records office, they still call it public records office in Hong Kong. They have a lot of gay articles from the newspapers, and there was also a case involving an ex-policeman, a formal case that a gay policeman was found dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that, and there was actually a list of homos they got in the government that the police were targeting to do something to, I guess, to expose, I suppose. Yeah. So in the old colonial days, it was not very nice. Life was not very nice for the British colonials who were gay. Although people know about it, many top officials were also gay. And so of course, it depends on politics and depends on power, how you are able to survive. Some people reach the top being homosexual without most people knowing it, or at least people tolerating it. And so,
so what's the gay situation in Hong Kong today?
Well, it's kind of interesting because many, to me, it's a little bit worrisome because some of the gay activists who were involved in civil society were imprisoned. And one of them is still in prison quite a bit. He's still in prison for a long time. Sham, Jimmy Sham. And city council, I mean, not city council, but the legislative council member who was gay was also in prison, but he got released on bail, I believe. And so they were not targeted for being gay, but they happened to be outspoken gay activists who were also activists, in political arena. And so they were in prison for that. But and the gay games got kind of moved to another country at the same time. It got moved many times, many different periods. And I mean, it got moved time-wise. And then eventually it's going to start in Hong Kong in 2023. But it's going to be co-produced in another country. So that signifies to me that they don't expect many people to show up in Hong Kong. If there's still a quarantine in hotels for COVID, is going to show up. Yeah. And I mean, the national security law is so strict that people are afraid of that. So I think it's a little bit of a mess. because the crackdown on civil society hasn't directly affected gay groups, but the fact that gay games had to find another sponsor and do it simultaneously suggests to me that there's a problem with holding it in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So these are all the questions I can think about. Do you have anything to add?
Oh yeah, and on the gay issue, I think it's mostly there's no law protecting gay marriage or gay sodomy. Got that given that many countries were former British colonies, they still have anti-sodomy statutes on the books. Singapore, India, for instance, but Hong Kong actually decriminalized that eventually. And a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
No, the current government actually decriminalized it a couple of years ago without any much attention to in the public. And also the age of consent originally was different for heterosexuals and homosexuals. And because of a brave case by a 19 or 20-year-old Hong Kong gay guy, he brought the case to the court, and eventually the government got rid of the laws banning gay sex. And so for a while there was no law, and then eventually they made it equal to gay for gay sex, not gay marriage, but gay sex. And so now it's legal at 16. So the age of consent is 16. So that's an important thing to know in America, because I mean, Europe is mostly, it varies, right? The age of consent, it could be 16, it could be 14, it could be any age, varies Asian of ages. But in America is 18, and people here think 18 is a real thing, and it's actually not. There's nothing magic about 18. And so I think it's kind of this funny thing that Americans think 18 is the way we should. Whereas if you give young people more autonomy, like I've traveled in Europe. I mean, Spanish people, kids drink when they are teenagers. They at youth hostels they can drink, whereas in America, wow, they have to control them until they're 18. So I think there's different ways of raising young people.
Yeah.
And in America, you don't give young people autonomy, although the young do sneak out, of course, and achieve their own autonomy.
Yeah. So we started our conversation by talking about Asian American activism. So what's the Asian American situation like today? Are there still activism going on?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think now because of the Supreme Court decision, there's a fear that gay marriage will get banned at the federal level, and also gay sex will get banned at the federal level. As a consequence of the turning down the abortion rights law. So that seems to be the argument from one conservative judge. He wrote in a side note in the opinion for the abortion case that he thought these other cases were never mentioned in the US Constitution, just like abortion was never mentioned. So they should be overturned. They should be looked at. And so, of course, not everything is mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. That's 200 some years ago, So that's a kind of a stupid argument. But these are originalists. They call themselves originalists. So they go by the original Constitution.
Yeah.
So let's see how far they move. And if that move, it doesn't mean that it's banned in the US. It just means it's banned at the federal level, but California still would protect gay marriage and gay sex.
Yeah.
So it depends on where you live.
Yeah. What's a queer Asian American visibility like in the United States? Are they very visible? Is there still a discrimination?
Yeah, they're much more visible. And well, I think there's always discrimination, but I think there's much more visible because even traditional groups have become more open, like even groups within the Asian community, like the Japanese American groups from World War II, they've become much more accepting of gay people and supporting of gay movements. And the Chinese community, though, is so split, you know, and especially you have more parents from moving in from China now. And so they have been showing up at school board meetings, criticizing schools for supporting gay people. And so the tensions still seem to still continue. But, you know, but I don't know if it's all new immigrants are like that. You know, it maybe they're bringing something from the old country and, you know, trying to protect their children. And so that's always the
Not
slogan.
everyone in China is gay unfriendly. So well, society is changing. Let's hope that more people can be accepting of gay people.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a political struggle. That's why people have to speak out. It's not, you know, it's not going to happen by itself. Although you're right. I mean, the more people they know, the more likely they'll be more accepting. And that's happened with the Republicans in the US. They're saying that the Republicans in the Senate may vote to protect gay marriage by law. So it'll be different from the Supreme Court. It would be specifically by the states would vote. I mean, the federal level will actually vote, or the Senate will actually vote to protect. And so that would be, if they were trying to reverse it, they would have to look at this too. You know, it'll be harder to reverse because the people have spoken at the federal level to come up with a new law to protect it. And now it passed the House, but it hasn't passed the Senate. And now it looks like, and it passed the House with many, many Republicans. So it looks like there's certain issues the Republicans don't want to fight. And, you know, abortion is one they wanted to fight, but gay marriage seemed to be one they've given up on.
Yeah. So this is going to be my final question today. So which is, thank you for sharing with us the fascinating history of Asian queer American history, as well as the activism you have engaged. For today's, well, Asian Americans and Asian queer people, do you have any suggestions or advice?
I think it's, look at your history. I think read. I think the important thing is to read. I think it's not important just to search online and Google. Go to the library. As a librarian, I advocate physically going to the library and browse and pick up some book and read it and expose yourself to things that are not online.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing your insight.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.